We are live now for the last session, which is on open banking. Open banking, is it a fit for government? The second version of the EU Regulation Payment Services Directive requires that banks make financial data available under customer direction. The result is open banking. This session will look at where open banking can be used in government services. It will also debate the pros and cons of open banking in a government context. This will be led by Susan Morrow, who is Head of Research and Development at Avogo Secure. And also on the panel will be David Birch, Global Ambassador for Consult Hyperion, Till Worth, who is Head of Platform for TrueLayer, and Rob Cutlars, who is Co-founder and President Digital Identity Net UK. Susan, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, thanks David. So today's session is going to look at the fit of open banking, if there is one, to local and central government. And we have got some very esteemed people on this panel that I'm very proud to host. But I'm going to set the scene first with a little bit about what open banking is and the impact it's having in the identity space. A very brief session before I hand over to my colleagues. So currently there's around 2 million UK citizens who are using open banking on a regular basis in solutions that support it. However, in the UK, the 9 largest banks and building societies are already using an open banking platform. They can expose data through an open banking platform. And if you use an online bank in the UK, 76% of people, citizens in the UK, use it online banking. You have the potential to take advantage of online banking, open banking. So does this mean that UK government should really try and use that, and why would they want to use it? So open banking is an initiative that's actually started in the EU by the Payment Services Directive, and this is the second version of a PSD2, which opened up the idea of exposing customer data through the banks. And why not? The banks have gone through a laborious, costly process to check people's identity. You get a bank account, it can take, it can take several weeks. In some cases, it can cost up to £300, I believe, to go through that KYC process. So the bank already has verified, assured data. So can the UK government use that data? And if so, how? So that question, what is the fit of open banking in government, is being put to our esteemed guests today. And I'll go through each one of those and introduce them and ask a few questions just to start it off. And hopefully from there, we'll build up a story of open banking and where it fits today in the UK government. So our first guest is Mr. David Birch.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Dave. Dave was named by Wired magazine as one of the top global go-to people in the world to get business information. So he's pretty well suited for this sort of panel, and many of us, as he does regularly. He's the global ambassador at Consult Hyperion and technology fellow at the Centre for Study of Financial Innovation. Perfectly suited for this. Now, time and again, Dave is named one of the most influential people in fintech. So if anybody knows about how open banking can fit other sectors, he does. So Dave, I'm going to ask you the first question. And my first question is, can you give us some of the key use cases that you believe open banking has a fit within government and digital citizen identity?
Sure, Susan, I'm happy to. So because of the European Directive on Management Consulting, I have to do this as a 2x2 matrix. I can't think of it in any other way. So if you think along one axis, you have the mandatory open banking provisions as well as non-mandatory provisions. So in other words, you mentioned the 9 biggest banks. They have to open certain APIs, but they can open other non-mandatory APIs as well if they want. So on one axis, if you think of mandatory and non-mandatory, and on the other axis, you think of the payment-related APIs and the non-payment related APIs. That gives us the 4 categories to think about, which I think is a useful way of doing it. Now, so we can easily get, so the first box, which is the things that are mandatory and to do with payments, that's quite straightforward. That comes under, there's a transition to what's called request to pay, RTP. And I don't doubt that the public sector will make use of that just like everybody else will. So in future, I'll get a message on my phone saying your council tax is due, and then I can pay it now, or oh, sorry, could you take it tomorrow, or can I do half now and half next week? And so you know, an HMRC will send me a request to pay instead of getting me to log into their stupid website and type in all the stuff when I have to pay my, you know, PAYE and things like that. So in a way, that's not interesting because that's just taken care of. There are some non-mandatory payment things that we might look at around, you know, notifications, like knowing when your salary gets paid in and things like that. But again, I don't think, for me, that's not the sort of interesting part. If you look at the non-payment APIs, there I think things get a lot more interesting there. So on the mandatory stuff, it means you can go into someone's bank account with their permission, of course, and you can look at the flows in and out of their bank account. This is the source of what in last year's sort of midterm review of open banking, people started talking about as the baby steps towards financial health. In other words, helping consumers, helping customers to better overall financial health, because it turns out it doesn't take that much of that data to be helpful to them. Most people are actually not that good at managing their money, and if you can get just a little bit of that data, you can be really helpful to people. So one part of it is just getting the transaction data from people's accounts and using that to help them. And I personally think that that's underrated as a way. So for example, if you know somebody's getting paid on this day, you know, you could ask them for a bill to be paid on the next day or whatever. Now, and the idea of doing that for all citizens, you know, seems crazy and monumental, but actually, because of advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning, slurping up that financial data and turning it into something that's good for people is actually much more achievable than you might think, because it doesn't need that much data. But what I'm particularly interested in is that final quadrant, which is the non-mandatory, non-payment stuff. And there's two categories of things there, which I think the public sector can really take advantage of. And one of those relates to the issues of identity and reputation. Because you see, if I'm trying to access public services of some kind in a country that doesn't have any kind of identity infrastructure and lots of people don't have documentation, a way to shortcut some of these things is, you know, I go to Woking Council to log into something and they bounce me to my bank and I do my bank login, which I do all the time, so I know how to do it on my phone and whatever. And then the bank sends back some kind of unforgeable cryptographic token to Woking Borough Council, which they can then use to identify me. And it's very hard to game those systems. So one part is the identity part, and the other part is the kind of more analytical part, which is to do with I mean, I want to say nudging. I don't know if that's very in fashion at the moment, but I worked on a project a while back for actually in South Yorkshire, looking at using mobile money applications to help, and it turned out quite simple nudging. So if you looked at people's accounts and said to them, you know, you need to put aside a little bit for the electricity bill or something like that, it, you know, turns out not that much nudging was really helpful to lots of people. So up in that top corner. So on the one hand, there's all the stuff to do with payments, and the public sector will take advantage of that. And Rob is going to, you know, talk about some things going on in that area. But I think if we're looking at the core of our eye, we should be looking at those other, you know, what are the clever things that we can do, partly just from knowing that people exist and are real individuals, but partly because, you know, we could nudge them in useful ways, I think. So that's my 4 categories, Susan.
Can I ask a related question to that then?
Sure.
Which I think is my next question. So with all that in mind, the human element of it, do you see any, because it's a bank and it's government, can you see any pushback from people wanting to use open banking with a government account?
Well, personally, I mean, I'm not an expert on these things by any matter, but I would have thought more people would want their data safely stored away in banks than sort of floating around on the internet. So in other words, I would much rather go somewhere. So I go to, I don't know, I go to download the Wetherspoons app, and Wetherspoons says, well, you need to prove that you're a person and you're over 18. I would feel much comfortable saying, well, actually, could you just go and ask my bank for that? Because my bank can tell you that I'm over 18 without telling you my date of birth and age and all this sort of thing. My bank can tell you that I'm a real person and I live in the UK without giving away any of my personal details. So in a way, conceptually, I think, and obviously a lot of this depends on communication, but actually having people's data locked up safe and sound in the bank or in the post office or some other regulated institution, rather than out there on the internet, to me actually sounds a better way forward, to be completely honest. So, and open banking is a step towards what people call open finance, which is a way of utilizing that data. So I'm quite enthusiastic about it.
Yes, I mean, I am obviously. But on that note, I'm going to move to Rob next. We're aware of time. So I'm going to do a quick intro to Rob, and then I'll start off again asking Rob a quick question. So Rob Cutlets is the co-founder and the president of the Digital Identity Net UK DIN, and which is a digital identity platform that uses bank data to prove an identity. So you're very well fit with this to be able to give us some really deep insight into digital identity and bank data. So he's also a serial tech entrepreneur and started out with BT, where he helped establish the UK's digital identity service, Yell. And he's got a very deep knowledge of identity collaboration as well, which is also important, working with government and bringing in third parties. So Rob, my first question to you is, so open banking has the bones of an EID framework, which was brought up in an earlier session about the lack of in this country. Do you agree that the regulators need to get on top of that, and where do you think it all fits with a digital identity framework in the UK?
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to Matt and the team for inviting me. I think that our experience looking at open banking, we started a project 3 years ago to look at how we could leverage the open banking framework. As you say, it has the bones of an identity framework, but it was not built with the identity token. So you don't get, when you authenticate at the bank, that it's Rob Cotlards who, with my email and my address. You don't get that, you get my transactional data. So the way that the construct is built is it uses the secure cryptographic certificates that David was referring to. It's very citizen friendly because all the citizen needs to do is take the mobile phone that they've got and the bank app they've got and authenticate. But it doesn't have a structure where the ID token is being served. And to your point about regulation, Susan, in our discussions with the FCA, when we started Digital Identity Net, what we were talking about is why hasn't it got the identity token? Because we would then have the basis of the first smart data initiative that could support identity in the United Kingdom, and we'd be a world leader because we would have been the first economy to have our banks regulated to expose not just their customer data, but the identity data. And the view of the FCA and the CMA and various others that we had was that the banks would be regulated to provide transactional data to give consumers choice, but the act of actually identifying whether it is me or you logging into the bank, that is effectively something that, although the bank's done a KYC, they have some intellectual property over. So typically what a bank is doing when you log in through your bank app and you authenticate yourself is running behavioral biometrics. And they spend a lot of money, invest a lot of money, not just to identify you, but to identify you at the point of use of the identity, at the authentication point. So we think open banking has the bones. We think it's an extremely valuable structure that could give Britain a leadership place in the exposure of bank identity and allow us to catch up with the Nordics, who also already do this, but they do it through centralized infrastructures. The Canadians who already do this with blockchain-based infrastructures, the Swiss that already do it, and various other nations that David and I could wax lyrical about. But I think what's missing for us is we haven't got the regulator's blessing for the ID token. So we as a community have to say to the banks and the various other key stakeholders in the economy, what do we need from you so that we could augment these these APIs and create identity services? And the journey we've gone on, Susan, is to consult with the regulators, talk to DWP, who I know are on the call, DCMS, the BBC, and various other stakeholders, and say, could we form a structure together that overlays on top of open banking the next level of services for which we need the bank support? And that's the journey we're on. And we think that that could be very valuable to the society because it would grow the inclusion base. Instead of people having to prove themselves through quite a long process with Verify, all they would need is their mobile phone and their bank's app. And that covers most of the population.
Well, yeah, but of course you would need to also cover people who didn't have access through mobile apps as well. But of course that could be, as long as you've got online banking. But then this comes down to user choice, doesn't it? And then you just layer on different choices depending on the demographic. Yeah,
precisely.
It's just part of a bigger picture.
I think it's about creating an easier way for the citizen to prove they are who they say they are. And I think the challenge we've had with identity in the UK is we've been doing brilliant work on standards and we've done great work on architectures, but we haven't made it simple for the citizen. And unless we make it simple for the citizen, they're going to have problems either making the process work. They may have to use credit bureau data, which, you know, Verify uses a lot of credit bureau data, and many people have thin credit files. So you only get maybe 1/3 of the population, maybe half of the population that actually use those types of products. Could we get to 95% of the population? And to your point about open banking, you know, there are about 40 million people right now that can log into their bank. Talking to some of the big financial institutions that are involved in our work, one of them shared with me that 30,000 people a week were starting to sign up to online banking and mobile banking services during the pandemic. So we've seen a massive shift from you know, this sort of, we're not really digital, to lots of people across all sorts of age groups starting to use digital applications, starting to use their bank app. And to David's point, not only have we seen those schemes being very popular with the public in the Nordics and other places, we have products like Bank ID, we've also got a situation where the consumers sort of trust the bank to look after their money and their data. So I think we are going to see a very strategic opportunity in the market. As you know, we have a pilot that we're doing. Some of you will have heard of the One ID project with some of the banks involved next year. That's really going and looking at the you know, solving problems across the commercial sector, the private sector. But we think there are opportunities for local councils and for central government to come and actually build that ecosystem and say, what do we really need from the product? And solve some of the things we don't have in open banking. So the commercial structures, the enhanced APIs, and most importantly, the alignment with use cases and standards. And we were talking, I think, for many of us earlier with Brian Glick, and there's a lot of good work being done by DCMS, who are now starting to take leadership position in moving forward, thinking about how these constructs could actually deliver value to the whole of the economy. And so we think it's bringing together those key groups around standards, around APIs, and some of the key stakeholders in government, central government, and banking.
On that note, I'm going to stop you there, Rob, because the point of the API is the perfect segue into our next guest, which is Till Worth. Thank you for that. That was really comprehensive and fantastic. Thank you, Rob. So Till, I'm just going to do a quick introduction for everybody who Till is. Apart from having an amazing name, Till Worth is the head of platform at Trulia. They're the largest open banking provider in the UK. And Till leads payments, data, and developer experience teams at Trulia. And prior to this, he worked in the Cabinet Office for GDS, and he was responsible for the government's payments platform, GovUK Pay. So again, Till, another absolutely perfectly placed person to discuss open banking in government. And Till will really, really look forward to some of the things you're going to about to tell us, but I've got one question for you first. So I believe, in fact, that Trulia is currently working with the Ministry of Justice And could you tell us a little bit about that and how open banking fits there?
Yeah, happy to do that. I think the first thing to say is we're obviously a little bit sort of in a fintech bubble of startups, right? And sort of are quite influenced by that. But I, because of my background, have told lots of my colleagues that actually there is massive opportunity in government, and it's very easy to underestimate the opportunity, but also the speed at which government can move if it wants to. And the Ministry of Justice is a really cool example of that. So we've been working for a while with the Legal Aid Agency, and the way they use TrueLayer and open banking is that when you apply for legal aid, you have to prove that you're eligible for it, and that requires telling them a bit about your financial history and basically your ability to afford legal aid or not. And the way this was done in the past is sending in bank statements. So people probably had to either had them if they're lucky, or they had to go to their bank, or go into an online portal, then go to the post, mail it to them, and then some poor case manager in the MOJ had to actually go through that and hope that they're legit, etc. They've replaced it with an online service where you can link your bank account, and then you can decide which transactions you want to share with the Ministry of Justice or the Legal Aid Agency. Obviously, the benefit for the user is that they don't have to go to the bank, they don't have to go to the post office. It's really quickly done. Probably the processing time is faster, so they're probably going to get their legal aid faster, would be my assumption. The benefit for government is that they know that the data is real, it's not fake, because it definitely comes from the bank. And they probably save a lot of money processing these transactions. So we're super excited about this. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why we joined a lot of frameworks like G-Cloud or Crown Commercial Service Payments frameworks, because we think there's lots of opportunity.
Till, can I ask you, it sounds to me like you could quite easily weave in some of the things that Rob and Dave have said around applying, the data API side of open banking, and the fact that the person's been verified already into the use within government. Just talking to what Rob was saying about having a framework, and what Dave was saying about the use cases around that specific area. Can you see that?
Yeah. I think it may be interesting to draw some parallels to the private sector. So we work with, unfortunately can't say the names, but you'll probably put one and one together. We work with a big e-commerce, North American e-commerce company, and with a big ride-sharing company that use open banking via TrueLayer to verify people that they onboard onto their marketplace. So people that sell things on the marketplace, or drivers, because they have to do some form of KYC. And they say, oh, actually, the banks have information about them. And if I get them to connect their bank account, then I'll get their sort code and account number, or IBAN. I'll get their name on the account. And actually, very soon through us, they'll get additional information like date of birth, address, email address, phone number, etc., so that they can do.
Where will you get that data from, Till?
So this is a really nice thing that you, I think, brought up, is that there's the mandated fields under PSD2 and open banking, and then there are commercial APIs that the banks offer. And I think that's actually important. Like, obviously, we kind of like the fact that banks are mandated to do this, but in order for the banks to provide good quality service and to really be in it, they actually also have to make some money along the way. So we think that the combination of the regulated APIs and then commercial agreements that we have with the banks will actually be really powerful, will be beneficial for the user and for our customers, and with that for us, I guess.
Thanks.
It feels like
actually, go ahead.
It feels like a perfect fit. That you've got the verified data, which is what government wants and needs to do online services for citizens. You've got citizens using it en masse. I mean, compared to Verify, which had a fairly low match rate, if we could get 76% of the UK population, quickly verified. So what do you see any again, I keep coming back to this because the edge cases, I often have to design systems, and it's the edge cases that often hold things back. Can you see any edge cases that would prevent uptake or have to be thought about more intensely for uptake?
So I think there are different layers to it, right? There's just the pure APIs that exist right now with no additional commercial APIs and other additional data. Then obviously that comes on top of it. But what we also do is that we call them insights APIs, where we basically take the transaction data and apply machine learning and figure things out. For example, the income. We actually have an income API that you could come to us, connect an account of one of your users, and you get all the transactions of the last 7 years. Okay,
Right.
now you got to do something with it. But you could also, in the same step, basically use our income API and say, oh, look, I've just connected this one account of this one user. Can you please tell me what their income is? And our machine learning based systems will give you an answer and a certainty score, et cetera, et cetera. And we do the same thing for spending, and there'll be more insights APIs coming soon. And I think that's
consent would be needed.
Oh yeah. Sorry, yeah. There's definitely always the consent of the user first. I think that's a really important thing to. I mean, obviously, A, it's regulated, so we have to do it, and B, it's really important for the users to like buy into this. And that's another thing I wanted to point out. Like, it's not just for government to like have citizens accept this. In fact, many of the citizens already use it. They use it in banks like Revolut to top up their account or to connect other accounts. They use personal finance management and savings apps like Plum, et cetera, et cetera. So to them, it's becoming increasingly normal to connect their account. And I think that will be the same in the government setting if they understand what the value is for them.
So we'll come into the last sort of few minutes. I don't know if Rob or Dave, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, Susan, I would.
I'm kind of interested because I was making those suggestions. I didn't realize Till had already implemented some of those APIs that I was talking about as future possibilities. So that's fantastic. It's an interesting cross-reference of the thinking. But I just wanted to come back to the sort of mundane side of it. So I think the place where people are going to start, HMRC, local authorities and so on, is probably in the kind of bill payment and request to pay and these kind of areas, which I think are reasonably well known and reasonably well understood. But I don't want to underestimate, the value of them. The ease and convenience. See, there's a world of difference between. In fact, as happened to me just a couple of days ago, I get a letter saying you have to pay your garden waste. You have to pay for the bins for them to come and take away the garden waste thing. And so to do that, I had to type in a URL to something and then get an account number from somewhere and type that in. And then I think I put in my debit card number. I can't remember. But the point is, it all seemed a little bit 1990s to me.
Yeah.
And what should really happen is, the thing pops up on my phone and says, oh, your garden waste bill is due. Do you want to pay it? Okay. End of story. It's and so you get I think for what sounds like, oh, it's just payments and whatever, you do get a really big increase in convenience, and from that you get compliance as well, of course, because if it's easy to pay the bill, then people will, because a lot of the time they just forget about it. So although I said at the beginning, that those bits aren't the most interesting bits, which in a way they're not, Till's right. Nonetheless, they still do deliver some pretty impressive value all round.
Yeah, massively.
Can I? I've got a question from one of the audience. Can I read it out? I don't know who's best.
Oh, there's an audience.
There is. Well, it's not just me. So banks are offering. This is from Martin Sansone, or maybe Sanson. Sorry if I mispronounced it. So banks are offering commercial agreements for additional API for additional customer information, all by granular customer consent. The problem I see if different banks offering additional information request standards.
Can I cover that one, Susan?
Yeah.
So I was just about to say, you were about to throw back out to myself and David, and David came in as always at his elegant and brilliant best. the things that we're missing are exactly what this rather beautiful question that's been asked is alluding to. So Till's saying that we've got commercial APIs and Premier APIs coming from the banks, and we have, and some already have them, but they aren't optimized for identity. And there is an opportunity to create standards around identity. And there's an opportunity for the people on this call to shape that process by saying, what do I actually need to make universal credit applications? You know, not 10 pages of going through Verify, but a few clicks on a mobile phone using a bank identity. That's the size of the prize for our society. And then because we've got the bank data from the bank, how can we make it nice and simple to pay the citizen their benefits so they get their money in their account, and we can keep people afloat during this pandemic? That's the value to the society, and we need standards for that, and we need collaboration to bring that together. And I think we can do that, Susan, with the work at DCMS, where they're putting umbrella trust frameworks in place, and all the people on this call, I think, are shaping that thinking. And I hope that the community of users, local government, and the central government, and the different government departments will say, this is what I need. Can you give it to me? Because that's the opportunity we have right now.
Just for clarification, just for so am I right in thinking, so the umbrella trust framework that you're talking about, there's no timescales set for that to be introduced, is there? And there is there's no prospect of a statutory basis for it.
Yeah, so David, I think, you know, that's a work in progress, and it would be appropriate for Hannah at DCMS to talk more about that. But I was at a session yesterday, and I think Andrew Budd at iProve alluded to it as well, where I see significant evidence, and Brian Glick was talking about it at Computer Weekly, where there's now an understanding that identity is of systemic importance to our society. It's important for our citizens to prove they are who they say they are, to get their benefits faster, to keep them afloat economically through difficult times. It's important for our economy because our businesses are seeing massive amounts of fraud. We heard earlier from some of the guys writing reports at 4 billion in fraud. Escalation to 4 billion is the figure that Lord Blunkett was talking about in one of the reports. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. So, David, I think that there's a real opportunity now to join up the work that's already been done. The first open data initiative in the world for banking is here in the UK, and it's open banking. How do we build on that with standards? How do we build on that with optimized frameworks for the citizen? And how do we educate the citizen that it's safe to share their data? Because to the point that Till and Susan were making, we've got a couple of million using open banking right now. We need 40 million if we're going to make this work for the society.